This is the Balanced Growth Show with Dr. Travis Perry, helping successful business professionals like you achieve balance in their lives.
Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Growth Show. I'm your host, Dr. Travis Perry. Today, we're pleased to have Mr. Chris McNeil. Chris is the host of Thought Leadership Studio podcast. He's an NLP master and an innovation award-winning entrepreneur. He's a strategy, thought leadership coach and consultant, marketing wizard, and musician. Welcome to the show today, Chris.
It is great to be here, Travis.
Awesome to have you, my friend. I was privileged to be on your podcast, so it's nice to return the favor. You know, it's fun to get to know you about your business and your family and the things that you're involved in. And let's just get right to your story. Tell us a little bit about how you became a thought leader and really helping to market and grow other businesses of thought leaders out there.
Yeah, I know thought leadership. Thanks for the question, by the way. But I know thought leadership is an interesting term. And some people think it's all about ego and being a thought leader. Some people think it's about how big your audience is. But what it really is about having a positive impact on the thinking of your audience in a way that helps them get more of what's important to them. It's about positive leadership to a different way of thinking, literally thought leadership. And I came to this realization. I was in the fitness business for a long time. I owned a chain of one-on-one fitness studios. And I wrote software that I was fortunate to get national recognition with some innovation awards for. As part of that, which parlayed into selling that business. And part of selling that business was I love the fitness business. I love everything we're doing with coaching, but I didn't have time to be a musician. And that was part of finding balance for me. And that I had studios in different places. And whenever there's management turnover, I'd have to make a long drive to train a new manager. And at a certain point, I was like, well, I really am enjoying music. I seem to have some talent. We could get a band together, which I did, and start performing and recording. But I can't do that with this kind of business. I sold that business, and the recognition parlayed into writing software to help organizations make the marketing work more effectively, get more results per unit time. That was my approach to balance. It's like, if you're going to put resources into marketing your business, you want to make every single increment of that work as hard as possible for you. Every media piece should be a salesperson is having the maximum possible impact. And I had some clients bring in things like the NLP you mentioned, systems thinking approach, looking at the marketing as a system, starting to model the differences between the customers who would grow 200% in a year, who go from 30% to 50% market share in a large market, go from being an also-ran to being the clear leader in the market, and use these tools to model the difference in the thinking of that leadership. And what I found was the distinctive factor that made a difference was these businesses that made the breakthroughs saw themselves not just as market leaders in terms of sales and market share, but as market leaders in terms of teaching the audience how to think about what they did, to take a fresh take, a new point of view. Here's how you do this. Here's how this whole industry should do this. Taking a big picture perspective, not just, hey, we're trying to convert leads and convince people to do business with us, but we're trying to move an industry to a better place, which I thought I did with fitness to some degree, because starting back in 1999, we're an innovator in this area, at least, of small one-on-one fitness training studios with a real efficient 30-minute workout with a trainer only. It's a big alternative to the big box gym.
Right.
Got
that
results.
Is very different.
Oh, yeah, month to month. So no contract. It's all dependent on client. It's extremely results-oriented, extremely goal-oriented, extremely focused with a trainer every step of the way. Now they're all over the place, and I wrote what I thought then was a newsletter. Now I call it a blog. I didn't even know what to call it then. I certainly didn't even know the term thought leader at the time, but Looking back now, that was thought leadership, and it made for a new type of industry. And that's what we do now, is like we help businesses move from seeing marketing as something, as a department, as something you just have to do to generate leads and customers, to an integral part of the relationship with not just their customer base, but seeing all the people who could learn about what they do and be interested in the future as a larger circle of an audience to engage with, and to lead to a way of thinking that can empower them to get more out of whatever it is they offer.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that you've been able to innovate, change, and take various industries and rethink these things through. Obviously, as a marketer, as a thought leader, that really is thought leadership to me. That is definitely thought leadership. So I love how you're laying this out here and how your experiences brought you to this point. So as a thought leader and as someone that's helping others to become a better thought leader in their sphere, why is it important for you as you're growing and scaling this business that you have great balance?
I think it's incredibly important because as a student of creativity and a teacher of creativity, if you don't allow gaps where your mind can wander, where you can be immersed in nature, where you can be like when I walk my dog, get the best ideas. If you don't allow these gaps, then your unconscious mind doesn't have time to process what could be the ideas that could be breakthroughs in your industry. One of the things I've learned studying the great geniuses of history, and there's a guy named Robert Dilts who wrote a series of books that I think is great. It's called Strategies of Genius. And he went back and studied the writings and interviews and used NLP to dissect the thinking processes of great geniuses of history like Einstein, Nikola Tesla, Walt Disney, Mozart. And you look at a series of books and study these guys and look at my own experience of those who were able to bring about breakthroughs. They got 4 key characteristics. And one of the characteristics is they know how to pass things between the conscious and unconscious mind. They know when to think deeply about a subject and when to let ideas come to them. But if you're not allowing space to let ideas come to you, even if all you care about is business, and nobody should only care about business, that's just one part of life, of course. But even for those who do, you're hurting yourself if that's all you do, because then you're not allowing time for your unconscious mind to process what could be the innovation that takes you through a quantum leap. And I think that's another part, is the philosophy of breakthrough engineering instead of linear progress. It's easier to do breakthrough engineering. It's easier to find a breakthrough outside the box, outside the traditional thinking, if you know how to suspend your mental set about how things are supposed to be done, long enough for new things to come in. You can sometimes find those breakthroughs that are quantum leap up in results and take less time because you're doing things differently, because you're not competing with everybody else doing things a standard way. You're going to stand out, both to your audience and to your peers, to yourself. And so it's about creativity and individualism. I think you have to have balance to allow space for that.
Yeah, it's crucial to be able to accomplish those things. And as an entrepreneur, and you have several businesses, how have you been able to scale this business? I know you do a podcast. I've been on your podcast. I know you're specialize in helping thought leaders and with their marketing, but you also speak, you do some content marketing. Tell us what has been the best way to scale your business while trying to keep this balance.
Well, one way that I found is very effective for me is that I've been able to charge a lot more for coaching by helping business leaders do the math and work out what would it be like if you could get in 6 months to a year what you would otherwise get to in 5 years. And you find hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars are being left on the table because they're not doing an accelerated learning program of breakthrough engineering in their marketing and in their thinking to fuel that marketing. And a piece of that is educating the marketplace to realize that you want to work with the leadership of a business on the level of their mental models, and that takes a relationship of equals, so a coaching and consulting relationship. So the agency we do, and there's a lot of clients that we don't even do any agency work for. They got things in place. Got to rather first see what resources are already within an organization for media development. But most of the time they do want help with media, but that's after we've already developed their thought leadership model, their thought leadership position through the coaching, so that they have a central manifesto. In your case, your books, or your manifestos. Some people might be a white paper for the business. It explains your unique positioning. And then develop all the things that draw attention to that, which suddenly are a lot more engaging because it's all about helping people get more value and educating them to make them feel empowered, not just to market to them. The marketing's emergent, but hey, it's more effective.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I agree with this. And I agree this is a huge part of why we use Invitology, is to not just slam people to disrupt their life, but to invite them in to do something that's meaningful. There's a win-win here. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about that concept that you just mentioned.
Well, something I learned from systems thinking is that the best things in life are emergent when you're working on something else. People who chase happiness never find it. It's a never receding goal. I mean, once you get the Ferrari, then you want, the Bugatti next. And it's the receding thing. But it's a different thing to be extremely grateful for what you have. And it's a different thing to realize that the person who's in control of how valuable your marketing is the same kind of person who's in control of how valuable your product or service is. It's the customer. And I learned a lot of this from a guy named John Seddon, who I mentioned earlier. And I'm a big fan of his Vanguard method. And to me, he's like the Edward Deming of service businesses. And they get breakthroughs for businesses by bringing the leaders to study their business from the outside in, from the customer's point of view, and design what they do to customer demand. And this seems intuitive, except that we live in a society that we're indoctrinated into hierarchical top-down thinking in organizations. But they demonstrate real quick that this hierarchical top-down thinking is evident to anybody who's listening right now. Have you ever called, like I had called pharmacy for something this morning, and you get a voicemail labyrinth that gives you 5 options, none of which are what you really want. And you have to go through 5 or 6 levels for 10 minutes before you finally get a person. And you think, this is not designed for you. Do you think they're saving money with this? I'm just going to get another pharmacy. And that comes from the hierarchical thinking, where they try to limit how much time is spent with the customer and reduce the cost of this. But when you go and design it from the customer point of view, counterintuitively, we put more resources in customer service. That's going to cost money. Well, guess what? It's always a positive return on investment because the customer sets the value. They decide what something's worth. Same with your marketing. They decide how much content's worth by how deeply they engage in it. So if you focus on making it a great experience for like the listener of your podcast, like you do for the readers of your book, like we do with the social media posts, what we do, don't think about, how do I get attention? Think about, how do I give somebody something cool that makes them feel a little more empowered for my unique expertise, and make it really empowering for them. Then much greater results in terms of audience building, conversion, and leads come about than if we had gone for those things directly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it is really the way that marketing has evolved from let's interrupt, everything that you're doing to, hey, I'm interested in what you think and what you value. Is this a match? If so, then let's serve each other. Let's help each other. This method, again, this resonates so much with me because I feel like that's how we were able to do Achieving Balance, and that's how we're doing Balanced Growth books. because we're asking people, we're interviewing, we're doing podcasts, we're doing all sorts of methodologies to find the ideal client, interact with them, and find out what they actually need instead of create something and go out there and parade it around and try to sell it. We're using the interaction with potential clients, ideal clients, to help manufacture something that they need.
That's a perfect example of design to demand. It's so often missed. And I think we mentioned before, how a lot of business leaders are unfortunately still stuck in a 1985 advertising mindset where people read newspaper, you interrupt their attention with an ad. And that's still in place now with the big data industrial complex. And not that there's not a place for that, but it can be overdone. And when people feel they're being targeted and chased by a predictive machine that anticipates their next move is going to be just like their last one, that's the opposite of creativity.
Absolutely.
One definition I have of creativity is how different your behavior is than what artificial intelligence could predict based on your past behavior. So instead, you aim to help people be creative by leading their thinking somewhere new and inviting their engagement, discovering what's really important to them that they maybe couldn't even articulate for themselves.
Yeah.
And invent that for and with them in a way that might surprise them because, hey, you're the experts, you know how to do these different things, but they're the audience, they know what's important to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the opposite of jumping on that call to the pharmacy as they're directing you based on what their needs are. Instead, you're flipping this around and say, what are the actual client needs? And quite honestly, I hear this all the time now. It's like, what are the client needs? What are the client needs? But a lot of times it's manufactured like the phone tree is for the pharmacy to really get what the pharmacy needs and then deliver something for a sale.
Yeah.
And that's still, I think people think they're a step ahead of the old school, but they're not too far ahead.
No, because then it's still about cost. It's not about service. And the paradoxical thing is that if you start trying to manage cost in a customer service environment, whether that's marketing or actually delivering a paid service to customers, you actually increase your cost because you're not doing it through and for the minds and the eyes of the customer.
Well, I love what you're talking about on this, Chris, and I think we could spend a lot of time here, but I want to ask you a little bit about, your Achilles heel. I think this is something that we all, wish we didn't have, but we're human and we have things that keep us from really growing our businesses or keeping that balance while we grow the business. What is it your biggest struggle while you're trying to grow and scale the business without losing that balance?
The biggest struggle on how to grow and scale a business without losing balance, to me, I have to think about that. It's a great question. It requires a little I don't have a ready-made answer, so I've got to think a bit. So forgive me for taking a minute.
No, you're fine.
But I would say I'm human and I'm just as prey to old habits as anyone else is. It's being able to take that outside view and look at my habits and decide which ones are worth keeping and which ones aren't. So then maybe the need of a habit reengineering program. I think I'm okay at that, but that would be my biggest Achilles heel because I'm human and I'm a creature of habit. And if I were to be able to step out of myself magically and look at myself like someone else could and redesign things, it might be to do more pattern interrupts. Is notice, you're doing things this way out of habit, but stop a second and think about that. It could be done differently. So self-awareness, a little more self-awareness, probably.
Yeah, I see it as self-awareness. I also see it as working on the business and instead of working in the business so much. I think those pattern interrupts a lot of times are, well, this is how I do it. What's my next thing? Very reactive versus, am I spending enough time to look at my systems, right? You're a systems guy. Right. I'm spending enough time looking at my systems to say, what should I be changing? How should I change the system? Is it working for the client? If I really believe in, making client-centric happen, is that working? So yeah, I spend Mondays, no client interaction, or potential client interaction. I do some coaching on Monday for my group. But the rest of Monday, it is all working on the business. It's prepping, it's organizing, and it's changing systems and looking at how effective things are. For you, when you've taken some time to work on the business, what is the change? What change do you see happen when you've made the time to actually interrupt those patterns and focus on either, business systems or personal systems to fix some of those problems?
Oh, insights just jump out all over the place. And even just like family issues, to take a systems thinking view of it. Not that people are systems, but it gets you out of your own ego a bit, to be able to see this much more in this direction causes pushback, this much more in this direction does that. If I step out and see that, then it's like, well, here's the relief valve for that. Here's something like a little change. And that's where we find in systems thinking, we call these leverage points, where the breakthrough can happen from seeing things as a system. And it's almost always in the category of changing the mental model of the system is based on, of the system designer. How are we thinking about this? How can we think about it differently? And that's the hard thing to do as humans. We have belief systems, and we believe businesses should do this, businesses should do that, people should do this, until we adopt that curiosity about what our own thinking is and step out of that. So that's what systems thinking helps me do when I do it well. And I don't always do it as well as I'd like to. So you're asking some great questions to instigate personal growth too. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's a lot of work to be done as an entrepreneur, as the business owner, as the leader, to help instigate change and build a new way of thinking and creating systems. Because I'm definitely a systems guy, always been a systems guy. I look at business systems through that lens. My mentor, Michael Gerber from the E-Myth, he's been very helpful that way through coaching, but also family dynamics. They come it's systems that a lot of times are broken. It's not, people and are individuals, they're human. But we have systems, if we boil it down to the biology and psychology there, we run on systems. So I like to see the world that way. And, apparently you do as well. And, maybe this rings true for listeners out there today going, hey, yeah, I love the systems. If that is the case, we'd love to hear from you and know and get some feedback on how, is this mattering to you? Does this make sense? What we're talking about here in the marketing, this design to demand versus, creation to selling, because it is absolutely the way of the future in marketing and in business growth. What do you see as other issues for entrepreneurs? You work with a lot of business owners out there. What are some of the other issues that they face trying to grow this, business, whatever business it is, and also have time and making time for balance?
Well, you brought up a lot of good points already. And by the way, I'm a big fan of the E-Myth, and I'm glad you're associated with Gerber. I actually had a guy I'm doing some work with. He's a thought leadership ghostwriter. He's from Australia originally. Just mentioned that Gerber had done a talk with Jay Abraham, is another hero of mine in business. And Gerber brought the house down. He was just a splendid public speaker. So I read the E-Myth a long time ago. That was part of my journey. Although it's not completely systems thinking, is thinking of your business in terms of systems.
Right.
But I like to look at the issues businesses have through the lens of what would it take to get rid of the issue, so we're not focused on the problem, we're focused on the solution. And the kinds of things that we're talking about is what brings the solution. No matter what, almost all business issues can be solved by breakthroughs in marketing that double and triple their sales, because then they have the resources to fix their operations if they got an operations issue. And that happens through applying some of these things like the Edward Deming method of looking at the system end to end and making it responsive to customer demand end to end. And the difference between thought leadership and just doing that just doing design to demand, is that you're designing to values, higher level thinking. Because Henry Ford said if somebody asked them what people wanted, they asked the people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. But the value was getting somewhere faster, more efficiently. But sometimes a customer needs to be educated about how to get more of what's more valuable for them once we're in tune with what those values are. So through the lens of what would make things different is stepping back and map out what you're doing. One of the things I have businesses do right to start with is let's make some flowcharts of your customer acquisition systems. And a lot of times you're like, what do you mean? What's that? We do marketing. I'm like, do you know where your customers come from? Like, well, some of them. And we think our marketing works. I said, well, why don't you talk to them and ask them the process by which they became your customer? Sometimes there's just breakthroughs. It's like we didn't realize that, it's this type of manager and this type of business were the ones coming to us, and we should just be taking these guys to lunch. And suddenly we doubled our referrals from that without spending hardly any more money. And we're just going to go spend on this other area that wasn't bringing us anything without mapping these things, mapping what's going on, look at it as a system, look at it as a flow chart, look at all the conversion points, what can be done better and differently.
Yeah, the reverse engineering, it just seems so logical. Yet again, business owners a lot of times don't spend the time or make the time to even be thinking about this because they're so entrenched in the business of doing the day-to-day. And one thing I've discovered is that when business owners are in what we call their work sweet spot, 80 to 90% of the time, that is their most productive thing that they can be doing during the day, but most are only there at about 25% of the time. I obviously am a big proponent of analyzing operations and systems. And so most of the time for me right now, that is definitely one of my top 5 or 6 activities. So it is part of my sweet spot. And some of you listening may think, well, I don't do that. That's not my realm. And so that's somebody else's role. I have a COO or a CEO, and fantastic. They can run with that portion of it. But somebody needs to be looking at that constantly and knowing, where are my clients coming from? How are they getting it?
Yeah. And if you're a member of an organization, should not your organization do it as a team? So you're working from a shared set of experiences, so you have a shared set of understanding, and you're more aligned that way than if everybody's just coming at it from a different point of view too.
Yeah, absolutely. So what advice would you give to some entrepreneurs out there who are struggling to really incorporate this design to demand? What 1 or 2, 3 things would you say, hey, start here, do this? What would be something simple?
Well, if we're doing it on a media basis and we want to really amplify our marketing, the challenge is what's happening off the radar is what I call it. Okay. Because a lot of business leaders, they immediately want to just go to pay-per-click and things to target people who aren't ready to buy, because they're not seeing the 81 to 89%, depending on what study you look at, of people who research online before making a major purchase. And by the time they click to buy something, they've already become educated. And if you haven't educated them, your competitor might have educated them to revere the benefits of how they do it. And we found several places to find in a B2C context and business to consumer context, especially where people talk naturally, that you can uncover insights about unmet needs in the marketplace. Reddit's one. People speak openly on Reddit. It's designed to be as anonymous as you want it to be. And you can find conversations through searches within Reddit where people are complaining about an industry. Here's everything you do wrong. And you might be the guy who looks at it, says, or the girl looks at it and says, well, if we did it differently, maybe we can be the ones to bring them what they're asking for and they're not getting. And not necessarily the blogs themselves, because blogs are contrived, just how we want to be thought of as thinking. The comments, especially in a polarizing blog that ticks some people off, because if you make people mad and they feel like their values or their beliefs are being stepped on, they will tell you what they are. And we've had some breakthroughs just from 1 or 2 long threads on a blog where people were going back and forth about youth sports fundraising and all these apps that were coming out. And don't they just make it easier for the kids to be even more entitled because you don't have to work to raise the money? We used to have to walk uphill to and from school and work to raise our money. So we worked with a client on developing a model where they partnered with charities to make it a growth experience. Still using an app, still just as easy that way. But now we're all about the growth, the unmet value. That was not intuitive. So, and another place is like long tail searches. Google autofill, if you start typing in a search, it fills out the rest for you. Well, that's a good way to find out the questions people ask search engines. So what you're doing is you're trying to find out that thinking that people are going through, that process they're going through before they contact you that was invisible before. So you can design your service, your product, and your educational content to empower people at that stage to make a wise decision and to understand how to extract more value out of what you do and take control of the conversation early. So by the time they click to buy, you're the natural choice. And you might bring them straight to that through the right education.
Ah, love it. Great start tips right there that I like their hacks, Reddit, blogs, Google searches. We've all been there. Some of us are on it daily or maybe too much, but that said, I love that you're using that as market research to help figure out what's in the mind of your consumer, what's going on, how can you then design something to meet that demand versus the other way around where a lot of people still are at. A lot of business owners still are struggling with, and they're not sure why they can't move that needle and grow their business. Hey, if listeners out there have enjoyed this, and I hope they have, if they want to get in contact with you, Chris, what's the best way? How can they reach you?
Well, they can go to my podcast site, thoughtleadershipstudio.com. And if they want to get a quick education on the methods I use and get on our email list too, they can go to thought.io, and that's thought spelled funny, THAUT.io/guide. And that's where we have the free Marketer's Guide to Strategic Thought Leadership. It's a quick read ebook, but it gives somebody a quick survey of the building blocks of strategic thought leadership. So you can kind of do a self-assessment and see what you need to change and start implementing these kind of practices to get some breakthroughs in your marketing.
Chris McNeil, thank you for being on the show today. We've had a pleasure getting to know you, understanding your business and your balance and what is making you tick. And so grateful for your insights and your direction on this. There are so many of my own clients, even especially who need to hear this and listen to these messages that, quite frankly, I've been preaching and teaching for a very long time in a very focused method through Inviteology that I know you and I, we both agree on systems. We agree on design to demand type of marketing. I do believe it's the way of the future. And if you're not on that wave, it's going to be a tough lesson to learn when it crashes and you're struggling to keep up. So I hope that they, take to heart what we've been talking about and they search you out. Thoughtleadershipstudio.com is the podcast. I've been privileged to be a guest on that show and, really want to encourage people to check that out. And the website, all the details will be in the show notes. So thank you again for being here with us.
My pleasure. It's been great.
And thank you, listeners. We do this for you because of the demand of wanting to know about how to grow, scale your business, and keep your family, your faith, your fitness, and your friends, all the things that you really care about the most in your life close to you while you're doing so. Until next episode, remember, live life on purpose.